Hello, everybody. This is Kevin Marchbank, and we will get started here with the presentation in a few minutes. Welcome to everybody, and thanks for attending. Thanks again for everybody who's jumped on. We'll get started here in about 3 minutes or so. Hey, everybody. Thanks for jumping on. We'll get started in about a minute or two here. Everybody, we'll get started here in just about a minute. All right, well, thank you everybody for attending, and we appreciate your participation, and obviously we'll get to, at the end, your questions. This is Kevin Marchbank. I'll be walking you through data warehouse modernization through automation today. And a little background on myself. I've been doing data warehousing for over 20 years, as much as it pains me to say that at this point. And I've been doing Data Vault for over 10 years. Obviously, in various organizations and industries, built a lot of data warehouses. And my history with WhereScape goes back to actually investigating WhereScape, talking with them, doing a proof of concept, and ultimately purchasing the software and using it myself as a customer. So very happy with the software, and I was so happy with it, I decided I didn't want to build another warehouse without it, and ended up joining the company, primarily initially as an independent consultant, then as an employee, and now back into consulting on the product. And so I can definitely attest to it from personal experience out in the field as a customer, in consulting, and as an employee. So we'll go ahead and start walking through the presentation, and then I will also be showing you the software as well today. So our agenda, we're going to talk through the demands of data warehousing. That certainly hasn't gotten less over the years, and the current trend of automation and modernization in this industry. So we'll talk through what that is and isn't, as well as, again, like I said, a demo of automation. So, over time, and definitely we've seen an increase in this more recently, the size of data volume, whether we're talking about IoT data coming in, ingesting that, a lot of streaming data just flowing into our warehouses, as well as the traditional processes of bringing in batch data, as well as through acquisitions. There's a lot of mergers and acquisitions going on in the industries out there, and that requires bringing those large volumes of data together. And obviously a variety of data stores that those are coming from as well, from NoSQL systems to Apache Kafka, to lots of various variety of sources, as well as your traditional DB2, SQL Server, Oracle sources. And those just continue to grow, especially over time as you have those technologies that may not be as popular today, but they're still out there, and as we would call them, quote unquote, legacy systems, as well as all these new technologies and sources of data. So these modern data ecosystems, a lot of talk about data lakes, obviously streaming as well. And with this raw volume of data that is coming in, the big concern there, obviously data lakes are a big story at the moment because we need a place to store that even before we've decided what we're going to do with it. At the same time, we have to understand our data. So at some point, we have to take the time to model that information and provide that context from the business on top of that information so that you can make use of it. Your data analysts can actually understand what they're sourcing into their reports, and that you can have that enterprise view of your data. So you can see here a lot of these different things. I mentioned IoT data, also social media and apps, app data coming in. Whether those are tweets and posts and things like that, as well as looking at the semantics around, the view of those posts, whether they're positive or negative and things like that, as well as your traditional RDBMS systems and files that are coming in, XML, JSON files, etc. Even still traditionally CSV files and things like that. So those can be coming into your S3 buckets, your Azure Blob Storage, HDFS, and also, again, your message buses that come into that as well. And depending on the platform that you've chosen, there's different concerns that you have to be aware of regarding that target platform, whether that's going to be Redshift or Snowflake, or again, traditional RDBMS such as SQL Server, or if it's SQL Server up in Azure DW being a different, some different things around how to handle data flowing into that as well. So again, in the end, regardless, that data needs to be put into a format with the business understanding so that business sense can be made from that data. So a traditional approach, data infrastructure delivery, a lot of hand coding and manual processes. So we've all seen, depending on our length of experience, those processes built by hand, and depending on the experience and skill of the individuals involved, there are different types and ways of those processes being coded and built, as well as just different preferences. And so there's a lengthy, expensive process involved with that. You have senior resources that are reviewing the junior resources as activity. There's a lack of agility, standardization, obviously, with people reviewing other people's code, let alone our own code that we've written many years ago. Many of us have opened up code and wondered who wrote it, and only discovered that we're actually the culprit, having written it a few years ago. And now we have new understanding and new new experiences and skills to apply to those processes. Documentation, again, that's one of those items that rarely gets completed, if even started, due to the amount of effort and time involved with that. Usually, the answer comes back. I'm sure many of you have heard this. When you ask about how does this work, they say, "Oh, go look at the code." So that's obviously a very high bar to understand what has been written and how that works, and the amount of time it takes to pull that open and reverse engineer that and figure out what has been done. I've had to go back into my own 1,200 line store procedures and try to figure out what I had written previously. So again, that also leads to tribal knowledge, whoever wrote it, and hopefully they're still there, the person that wrote it. If not, then it's a long, laborious process to reverse engineer that. So automation helps modernize all of this by putting those standards in place. You have automation patterns. You reduce the complexity of introducing new platforms, new technologies, and data platforms, because the tool sets have those patterns in place to deal with those things. So it's easier to evolve and expand on that once you have those patterns in place and you know how to implement them. Obviously, the automation's taking care of a good portion of that, and you can leverage that to bring in those new systems, new technologies, et cetera. So there's obviously a reduced cost with that. And with all of that, there's less risk to your projects, to bringing in new acquisitions. There's a greater consistency through all of that, your ability to understand what has been built and what will be built is all through those patterns and the automation involved there. So a little background on WhereScape. WhereScape really helps in this process. And again, like I said, from personal experience, I went through a proof of concept and chose to purchase the product because of all that it did during the proof of concept, but I didn't realize how much more the product does than what can even be shown during a demonstration or a proof of concept. The tool is much wider and deeper than we're able to just to show you even in this webinar, let alone during a proof of concept. The WhereScape has over 700 customers across the world. It originally started in New Zealand as a consulting company. And like many of us who have industry experience, we've thought about automating our tools that we've built, our scripts and templates and things that we've built over time. And WhereScape actually did that. And they actually did it for themselves as a consulting company and built it out to the point that their customers started asking if they could purchase the product for their own use cases. And that's how it turned into a product. So ROI, 5x developer output, that is really actually a conservative number. The return on investment is much greater than that. And the other thing to realize too is when you say 5x developer output, it's 5x of your existing resources that already understand your business, that already have experience, and even your senior resources. You are making them 5 times more effective. You don't need to bring in new resources and train them and help them understand the business. You're taking your existing resources that have already been trained and already been invested into by your organization and making them more effective. And this product's been built over 20 years of automation for all sorts of sizes and industries. We have teams of 1 all the way up to teams of hundreds using this product. A few of the customers here that are using the product, and really what we like to highlight here is just the different customers, the sizes and industries involved here. So you can see your large organizations like Costco, Union Bank, et cetera, all the way down to smaller organizations like Delta Community Credit Union. So again, it doesn't matter the size of the team or the projects that are being taken on. This product will help accelerate any of those efforts that your organization is undertaking. So again, automation is leveraging existing data warehousing patterns. The toolset's been around for a long time, and it automates Kimball methodology, Inman methodology. We're talking about data store, third normal form, star schemas, as well as Data Vault 2.0, with Dan Lindstedt behind that as well, who's a big proponent of the automation software that WhereScape produces. And you can see through just looking at the slide deck, it's kind of an eye chart, but you see all the way from the left the ingestion, whether that's through CDC, replication, stream processing, standard ETL, and then bringing that through all the way through to your, on the right-hand side, data usage. So your consumers of your warehouse data through your BI teams, your report developers, data analysts, data scientists, et cetera. So the way I like to really just summarize the automation that WhereScape provides, it's really automating the meat and potatoes of data warehousing. That large effort that traditionally has taken a long time is really standardizing, automating, and reducing that time to delivery to your business. So the conventional way for creating a data warehouse, I'm sure you guys have seen many of these tools. You may be using quite a few of them in your data warehousing practice. And you're going from your requirements down at the lower section of that stairway that we lovingly call internally the stairway of doom, and walk our way up through these various tools, these disconnected processes that we have to hand off. And there's obviously inefficiencies between each of these steps as we hand off this information to the next group or tool that we're using to go from requirements gathering to actually profiling, data modeling, building the actual infrastructure, and then developing the ETL to populate those data warehouse objects, all the way to finally deployment and making that available to your end consumers, as well as maintaining that over time and documenting it. So we take all of that and we put it all into our standard set of tool sets with the automation in place. We automatically handle the documentation as you're building out all of this. It's metadata driven, underpinning all of this. As you pull in your requirements and you start modeling things and building them out, the tool set is writing the standardized code that you, of course, can modify. I'll talk to that a little bit later, but you can change how the tool set automates what it automates. And this flow process goes all the way through the tool set so that you're not having this disconnected process where you're losing information as you pass it off to other people. So it has best practices built in for handling, for instance, dimensional modeling for type 1 dimensions, type 2 dimensions, et cetera, to Data Vault, your hubs, links, satellites, and things like that. So implementing those best practices and industry standards into the tool set and fully documenting them as well. So you have a full lifecycle management within the tool set. So our two main products, WhereScape 3D, which is the modeling tool and automates a lot of the modeling process and design. And then WhereScape Red, which is the actual builder tool. It understands how to actually build the objects and the ETL processes. And then WhereScape Data Vault Express, which is really a combination of both products that implements a lot of wizards and standards and best practices for Data Vault 2.0. So this is an overview diagram of the builder tool and its scope here. On the left-hand side, it's kind of similar to that other diagram that you saw that was a little bit more complex, but on the left-hand side, the turquoise box, we have our data sources. And again, those can be streaming, CDC, standard batch loading files, etc. We land that data, so this is more of an ELT approach. Land the data so that we quickly disconnect from the sources, and then transform that data. And again, this is not a prescription. These are options that you have within the tool set. You can choose to mix and match as you so choose in your organization, whatever fits your development methodology, however you want to design your warehouse. We will help automate that. So you can land that data, and then you can go into your data store, data lake area, and You can see that here on the left, or you may build a data vault or through normal form. However, you can choose to do one of these, a mixture of these, or you can actually skip all those and go directly into a star schema. We have customers all over the board that choose to do the build their warehouse and using various methodologies, but the common theme is they're leveraging WhereScape automation to do this work and to apply the standards and get the documentation that they can provide to their end users. So we bring all this information out to the accessing layer, which may be cubes, aggregates, exports, they may be views, etc. And then you have your standard BI tools that you may already be using. So Tableau, Power BI, Looker, etc. Underpinning all of this is a metadata layer. So we have a metadata repository that's tracking all of this work that you're doing. Again, I'll talk to that as I go through the demonstration. And then again, documentation that comes out of all that metadata. We have a scheduler. It's multi-threaded. It can run up to 50 threads to be able to load all these things in parallel. And then obviously, if you have an existing warehouse, we can retrofit that in to the metadata and manage that. We have many customers who have taken their existing warehouse efforts and ingested that, retrofitted that into the WhereScape automation tool, and then allowed that to continue loading that existing warehouse through WhereScape at that point and build all of their new objects and ingest their new sources using WhereScape going forward. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into a demonstration here. And I'm going to pull up first our builder tool. So this builder tool is, you can think of it kind of like SQL Server Management Studio. On the left-hand side, we have our warehouse object browser. These are all the different object types within the tool set. In the middle window is our work pane. So if I click on a particular table, you're going to see the columns involved here. We have our results window down here. You'll see results as we do things show up down here. And then on the right-hand side is our source browser. So I have some tables already loaded in here. I'm going to go ahead and browse a source connection. I'm just going to use Northwind here. And it browses and queries that source, and I can actually interact with the source directly here. So if I take a look and I want to look at the data from customers, this is the data directly from that source database. I can do a row count, do some simple things there with the customer's data. Now, if I want to bring this in, I already have some tables loaded into my warehouse, and you can see the sources for those listed here, the connections that they're pulling in. I don't have the customer's table coming in, so I'm going to go ahead and drag this in from my source into my warehouse. When I drag and drop and let go, you're going to see some standards start to be applied already. So there's some standards that come out of the box, but one of the initial things you would do when bringing the tool into your organization is to set up those standards to whatever it is your organization wants. So in this case, we have load underscore prefixing this table because it's a load table. We also have this set up to be going into the load schema in my warehouse. And I can choose to change these, but my defaults are set so that when your developers are building things, it automatically applies the defaults. So if somebody chooses something else, that still gives you the flexibility to do that, but you'll know if it's not, if it wasn't done with the defaults, that the person chose to do that. It is applying data type mappings. It automatically read that this is coming from SQL Server and going to SQL Server, and so it's applying that data type mapping. There are a slew of data type mappings, many more than what are in my list here. These are just some ones that I've installed on my system. So if you're going to come from Redshift, if you're going to come from Hive, et cetera, all the way back to if you want to pull FoxPro data in, you can do that as well. So I'm just going to click Add here. And the tool set is going to bring up and use some defaults set here. And I can change these. For right now, I'm just going to click OK and click Create and Load. And that quickly, what it's done is read the metadata from the source and created the actual table in my SQL Server data warehouse. And you can see that it has pulled in some comments from the source system. If WhereScape can read comments, if there are comments in the source system, it will attempt to read those out and bring that into the metadata as well as persist it into your target platform. Now this demo we're doing, and we're mostly talking about SQL Server here, but we can be pulling from SQL Server and going into Snowflake or Redshift or Azure DW. We support all those platforms, DB2. I've personally built warehouses on all of those different platforms, including Oracle, Oracle Exadata, DB2, DB2 Blue. I won't go through the whole list, but this same tool set works on all of those platforms. So as we go through here, one of those questions that you may come up with that statement is, how does it handle all of that? Does it have its own engine? And actually, this automation tool is building code for your target platform. So you can see one of the reasons I purchased the tool set is because it's transparent in what it does. And here, it actually shows me the create table statement that it ran on the target warehouse. Now this may, if I was on Snowflake, this would be SnowSQL that it wrote, including data types for Snowflake directly. In here, you can see that it's adding the comments to the target columns and then loading the data. Now, depending on the platform, in the case of SQL Server, you saw that it, if you saw real quickly when I pulled up the properties, it used ODBC to load this information. I can easily go in here, go into the properties of the table and say, you know what, because I'm on SQL Server, I want to run an integration services load. And what will happen is, now that I've changed that and I run a load, it will automatically create an integration services package on the fly and execute that. And now I've loaded the data using integration services. So you have a lot of options there. Integration services gives you some options for batching and commits and things like that that you don't get through an ODBC load. You can also do native SQL. So what that will do is pull via ODBC, since that's fast, into a flat file and bulk insert that into SQL Server. So several options there. What I'm going to do at this point is I have my load table. I'm going to go ahead and bring this directly into a dimension. So as I mentioned before, you can pull these tables into data stores, for instance. You can see I have some data store tables already. And what I'll show you first is that I have a fact table already created here. If I click on that, you'll see that I have my keys from the dimensions in this table. And if I go to my diagram here and choose a fact table, I've got one fact table in the system at the moment, and choose a schema diagram, you'll see here that I have the fact table joined to dim order date, dim required date, and dim employees. And these two date dimensions here are actually role-playing dimensions, I can tell by the icon here, that point to the actual physical date dimension. So you can have role-playing dimensions within the tool set that are views of a physical dimension if you have different roles that you need to support there. Also, as we build those out, and I'll show you this as we build these objects, if I take a look at, for instance, dim products, the metadata is always tracking what we're doing. So if I look here at this diagram, this is a track back diagram of the products dimension. And you can see that we go through some stage layers here. We pull in to get all these data store tables together that got loaded from these load tables, and these are the source tables through the order source connection that are populating this. And I can use this to quickly go to, if I need to troubleshoot, for instance, let's say there's some questions around the ranking of this. Obviously, they'd be looking at the documentation, but if I need to make some changes, I can just quickly right-click on this, go to that object in the pane, scroll over and look at the transformations here, and look at those functions, and I can go and change those if I need to in the tool set. So what I'm going to do is I need to bring in my customers' data into my star schema. That's been the request from my business. So what I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to browse my data warehouse connection, because now I have this load table in my data warehouse. So if I go to my load schema, I've got load customers now. I'm going to go to my dimensions and drag this in. So my customer said, you know what, we just want current data about the dim customers. So I'm going to do a type 1 dimension. You can see that it's applied some different standards here. It replaced the load underscore with dim underscore, and it's sending it to the info mart schema. Now, because I'm creating a dimension, the tool set is going to ask you some questions regarding the Kimball methodology. Do you want to do a type 1, a type 2, type 3, or type 6 style of dimension. So I'm going to go ahead and choose normal, which is a type 1. And then it's going to need some additional information provided. So I said, go ahead and build the table. I'm going to create and load the procedure for it. Choose a set-based load. And what it wants to know is, hey, what's the business key column for this dimension? I'm going to choose customer ID. And there's some other defaults here. Again, these are all things you can change in the default settings, but insert zero key record, that's a Kimball standard. And then we can process by batch. You can choose to do a merge or an insert update, as well as some additional options there. So I've gone ahead and created this. So that quickly, by answering a few questions, it's actually created the dimension. It has added all the documentation to it, created a store procedure, and executed it. So if I look at the data now, I have my surrogate key on the left-hand side. I have my zero key record in the data. And then I also have a load date and create date and update timestamp. So to look at this real quickly, again, one of the reasons I purchased the tool set, a longtime SQL Server expert, I've been using it since SQL Server 6.5. Very picky about my code. I wouldn't use any automation tool sets. I'm sure you've seen code that other tools have built over the years. I won't name names, but pretty poor code with a bunch of nested logic. If we take a look at this particular store procedure, you can see that it's well-formed, transparent to what it's building, and set-based operations. So we can go through and actually inspect what the actual procedure is. And this procedure is actually compiled into SQL Server. So you can go and actually execute it yourself, look at it in SQL Server. It's not encrypted or anything like that. It's all exposed for you to use. Now, not that any of your customers would do this, but let's say right after you delivered your type 1 dimension to the business, they said, you know what, actually we do want a type 2 dimension. We want to track changes on a couple of the fields. So after you grumble, you can go back and double click on the dim customers, the customer's dimension. Simply go up here to the upper right and change it from a dimension to a changing dimension. And then I'm going to click OK. What WhereScape's going to do at this point is say, well, wait a second. If you want a type 2 dimension, then you need to add these additional columns to the table. So I can choose if I want to alter the table or recreate it. I'm just going to recreate the table. And this is a little wizard that lets you do a lot of operations in one go. I'm just going to recreate the table. And if I look at the columns, you'll see that it has now added an end date, a start date, an end date, a current flag, and a version to the table. And now I'm going to rebuild the load because now I have some additional information and it adds a new section for change detection. So I'm going to click on that and you can see this change detection fields. It needs to know, okay, if this is a type 2 dimension, what things are you tracking changes on? So I'm just going to add company name, and contact title. Click OK. I can throw null support on this to track, to basically wrap things with is null to see if things are going from null to a value or from a value to null. Click OK. And it's created that procedure. And then I can execute that. And just like that, we've swapped this type 1 dimension into a type 2 dimension. We have our surrogate key. We have our zero key record as well. And then if we scroll over to the right, we see the start date, the end date, current flag, and version. And again, how it handles the end date and the start date, you can modify in the settings. We kind of skipped past that, but just so you know that that's there. If we want to look at the actual changes, there's some lightweight version control within the tool set. And if we look at the procedure at this point, again, I show the code just so you can see that it's nice and clean as far as what it's doing and transparent. You can see the change tracking right here. And if I quickly pull up a previous version of this procedure, I can take that and move that over here to the side and compare it. And it's going to highlight just in the new procedure what's been added and what's been deleted as far as rows. We can scroll through here and see the 0 key record insert now has these additional fields with these values being inserted, and then all of these other rows that were modified. So very quickly, those things we're able to create it initially, but one of those things that's not really mentioned in the ROI is the refactoring, and I think you really get a huge increase in productivity from the refactoring, the ability to go back to any, track back to any place in your process and make modifications. So if I do a track back on this customer's dimension, it's going to be very simple. We simply pulled in the customers table from the Northwind connection and landed that, and then put it into the dimension. But I can at any point go in here and say, you know what, I want to go and work on this and jump to that table and make changes. So at this point, we've pulled this dimension in, we've created this customer's dimension. I want to bring this into my fact table at this point. So I have a stage table that's staging up the data for my fact, and I have a customer ID here already. So I'm going to refresh my data warehouse list. I'm going to go to my InfoMart schema where I have my customer's dimension. And I'm going to drag that onto my table here. And what WhereScape's going to do is say, you know what, you're pulling a dimension into the stage table, and I think you just want the key, the surrogate key, so you can pull this together with a fact. Now I can go into this browser and add any of these additional columns by dragging it over. I'm not going to do that at this point. It was correct. I only want the key. So I'm going to go ahead and rebuild this table. And then what I'm going to do is rebuild the load procedure. And you have some options here with SQL Server, whether you want to do cursor or set-based operations. If you want to do parameterization, we're not going to really cover that, but if you need to do incremental loading, there's a lot of other things you can see here, like with locations, you can use parameters for whatever you would like for controlling your loads or other things. So what's going to happen here is that the builder for the procedure is going to ask about how do I join these dimensions together with this data. Now it did a simple name to name match on the fields. If that didn't match, I could go in here and choose which ones it needed to use to match up to the business key of the dimension. But when I click OK on this, this is the customer's dimension that we swapped into a type 2 dimension. When I click OK, it's going to say, well, wait a second, that's a type 2 dimension. You're tracking changes on these 3 fields. It does that as a reminder. Now, how do you want to get the correct surrogate key, the correct version of this customer? Now I could choose no date. If I do that, it's going to use the current flag and always grab the most current surrogate key, most current version of the customer to put into the fact table. Or I could be more cunning and go in here and say, you know what, I want you to get the version of the customer based off of when they submitted the order. So we'll use order date here, click OK. And now it's going to walk through the rest of the dimensions. The employee's dimension, it's matched on employee ID. When I click OK, it's not going to ask any additional information because that's a type 1 dimension. It doesn't need any other information. For these role-playing views, role-playing dimensions, order date, require date, and we're done. So at this point, what I do need to do is load up my orders so I can actually get data in here. So I'll click load. That will quickly pull in the 8,200 rows there, being an SSIS package. And then what I'm going to do is right-click on stage orders and execute that. So once the data is in your target warehouse, it never leaves the warehouse. So you can see on these load tables that it's running an SSIS package or an ODBC load or a native ODBC load. So it has to obviously reach out to your source system and pull that data in. But once that data is in this warehouse, it doesn't matter which platform you're on, whether it's SQL Server or some other platform, the code that WhereScape writes, it writes for that target platform. So it executes within your warehouse. There is no separate ETL engine that WhereScape runs. It's simply automating the generation of native code to your target platform and executing that in your target platform. So you get all of the scale and power of your target warehouse. A lot of people ask the question, how do you need to scale WhereScape? And the fact of the matter is you don't, you just need to scale your warehouse because we're writing code for your target warehouse. So I'm going to go ahead and execute the store procedure. It's going to run, and you'll see here that it loaded 8,200 rows, and it also lets you know if it can't match rows to a certain number of rows to the dimensions. And the reason these didn't load is because I haven't actually loaded those dimensions. If I look at the data here, you'll see that I have my customer key filled out. So it didn't give me a warning about that because all of these are matched. We just walked through the process of loading up the customer's dimension. So that's been populated and it could match. And Kimball methodology being used here, we didn't have any records that could match on the employee or the dates, so that it mapped those to the zero key record. So I leave that in there as an example just to show you how that works, that it's handling those situations. As far as my fact table goes now, I'm going to refresh my data warehouse list. I'm going to go to my stage tables, to stage orders, expand that, and I now have dim customer key in there. So I'm going to go to my fact table and drag dim customer key in there. And at this point, I can use the wizard. I'm going to recreate the table. I'm going to regenerate the procedure. I'm going to execute it and display the data all in one go. So watch this as it goes through and it tells you everything that's happening and then displays the data. And just like that, we have a customer's dimension integrated into our fact table. And if I go back to my diagram here and do a new diagram, choose the fact table again and do a schema diagram, you'll see here that now the customer's dimension is tied in with the fact table. So really quickly there, one of the advantages of using an automation tool set is really increasing that partnership with the business. This is a process where you could actually sit down with your business when they provide a user story or request at the beginning of your sprint planning sessions and actually bring this information over so that you don't lose that time with the business. One of the biggest difficulties in data warehousing is the amount of time it takes the data warehousing group to return information back to the business based off their requests. So a business makes a request, submits a user story or what have you. You go say, okay, I'll get that into my next sprint. And then after your sprint is done in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, you provide that data back and say, okay, what does this look like? And then the business comes back and says, you know what, I'm working on other things at the moment. I'll get back to you next week. And then they get back to you next week and say, hey, this isn't quite right. This is what I want. Or, you know, hey, I said type 1, but I want a type 2 dimension, et cetera. And then you have to go into your next sprint cycle, fit that in, and then come back. And this is really slow iteration process. Whereas with the tool set, you don't have the concerns of actually writing all the code. You can bring this through, and just like we've done in this process, we went through very quickly and pulled this information through. So one of the other benefits of the tool set that I'll quickly touch on is the ability to change how the tool set automates your code. So if we take a look at some of this information, for instance, here's a DTL template that I have written that creates a view. So you can use templates to modify how it writes code. If you want it to do something different than what the tool does out of the box, fully 80% or more of the tool, and it's working towards 100%, is template driven, and you can change how it automates what it builds. So now let's take this to the next level. So we went through and built this dimension by hand. We pulled the load table in, we pulled it into a dimension, we made some property settings, changes, etc. But the tool set with WhereScape 3D brings us to the whole nother level. So this is the modeling tool set. And what I'm going to do quickly is take this concept and do it en masse. I'm going to take this north wing connection here. I've got a connection set up here. I have a set of model categories here, and I'm going to bring in the north wind data. Now I already have one created, but I'm going to quickly, just to show this process, reverse engineer a source. I'm going to call this version 2.0. I'm going to grab from Northwind. I'm going to filter this down to just tables and discover and profile it. I'm going to do a full discovery. This creates the model very quickly. You can see how quickly it was able to reverse engineer that. And then I'm going to do a quick profiling. So there are a lot of metrics you can run here. I'm just doing 3 quick ones, but you can do things like standard deviation. You can customize these. So it's going to run through and profile all of those objects as well. And I know that not all of your source systems are as well defined as Northwind with our primary keys and foreign keys defined. We do provide wizards to help derive those. Likewise, you can also drag and drop to create them. But you can also look at the profiling results here very quickly to identify those attributes that are valuable. We have distinct value counts, null percentage. So quickly we can see that ship region has a lot of nulls in here, and choose and make decisions based off of that. So again, this tool set helps automate a large section of a warehouse. We've had customers take 10,000 tables and ingest them quickly into a data store. And I'll kind of show you that real quick here. If I take this model and do an advanced copy, one of the powerful things within this tool set is the ability to quickly create a warehouse using the methodology of choice. So in this case, I'm going to do a data store. We'll call this version 3.0. And I'm going to apply a model conversion. So I have a model conversion in here. These are some of the automation rules built into the tool set, and create a data store. So very quickly, what's going to happen here is it's going to take that information that we reverse engineered from the source and build a warehouse. So just like before, when we went through with the other tool on by hand, individually for a table, we built load tables, and then we built stage tables. Actually, in our case, we didn't build a stage table, but that's frequently what you'll do before you go into data store tables. So in this case, very quickly, those automation rules were able to read that entire model and build an entire warehouse. What I'm going to do real quick, Data Vault Express obviously has some additional wizards and things to handle Data Vault design as well. So I want to show you real quickly here the Data Vault design. I'm going to display this data model. WhereScape 3D allows you to go all the way from a conceptual model to a logical to a physical model. What I'm quickly doing here is using the Data Vault design model category. And you can see these particular objects are built off of the Northwind, but they may not exactly look like the Northwind tables because we should be building a more business-focused model and tie those in. And you can tie multiple sources into this particular model, and it will handle building the appropriate objects to load all of those sources into this one model. I have a customer who has over 18 sources, all feeding one model. If we go and look at the details here, we're marking things like business keys, satellite attributes, and things like that. I won't cover that particular modeling methodology. Just suffice it to say that whatever methodology you want to use, you can, we either already have them pre-built or you can customize them, the model conversion rules to build whatever you need to. So in this case, I'm going to use this model and generate a data vault from it. So again, it's being sourced from the Northwind connection. I'm going to generate a data vault, and we'll call this 3.0, just like we did with the data store one. It's going to ask some additional questions. I won't go through the details on this, but you can see these 3 different model conversions that are going to run, and it's going to run through all these rules. Again, this is the automation magic behind the scenes for this modeling tool. And what it's going to do is build a raw vault based off of that information. And very quickly, we end up with a raw data vault pre-built. And it's obeyed some of the questions that I provided answers to regarding multi-active satellites, what the business keys are, what the rates of change on the attributes are, so that it can split them out into link tables, hubs, satellites, etc. And you can see hash keys being built to support the Data Vault 2.0 methodology of using hash keys and insert only. So now that we have this raw vault model, we need to create the load and stage environment like we did by hand in the tool. And I'll call this Data Vault 3.0. Again, a bunch of additional model conversions to create the entities that are required to load this. So it's going to run through this list. and build the required objects. When I click finish here, you're going to see that same raw vault model, except that now it also includes the load and stage tables required to populate that. And if I take this, I'm going to set it and prepare it for red. So again, this integration point that we mentioned earlier, where you're able to use the same tool set and simply push it into the builder tool. So in the case of WhereScape, this WhereScape 3D, this is the modeling tool. So it doesn't actually build the physical objects in your target platform. It's doing all the modeling. And at this point, we're going to send this to WhereScape Red, which is the tool set that knows how to build these things. I'm going to segment these. Now, again, this can be automated, but we leave this piece out so you can see this process. We're going to assign these to the various targets. So these are going to go to the schemas that I want them to go to, and the rest of these to the raw vault. Click update. And again, we can add some groups. I'll just do that real quick here. We'll say SQL demo, and put all my objects in there. And we'll go through, you can see it's applying some data type mapping. So if you're coming from DB2 or other sources, it's going to be mapping those data types to whatever your target is. And now I'm going to export this to WhereScape Red. So what's going to happen is it's going to create an XML deployment package, and it's going to bring up the deployment tool set. And I will send that to my repository, my development repository, and it's going to walk through and find what's going to be built brand new and what's going to be built or be replaced. There's a lot of options here for deployments. I won't go through that, but WhereScape supports full continuous integration, continuous deployment, CI/CD. We have our Red CLI interface. Some of our customers use Jenkins for automating these deployments between their various environments. And you can have different settings in settings files for each of those environments. What's happening here is first, it updates the WhereScape metadata, and then WhereScape Red takes over and actually builds these objects and adds the comments to the metadata as well as to the actual objects in your target platform so that your BI tools can actually read that documentation out of your warehouse. And then it's going through and actually generating all of the procedures, store procedures that it needs to populate all of this. So you can see it looping through here and generating those store procedures for each of those objects. And then at the end of this, it's going to go through and in the case of SQL Server, will create the appropriate indexes and keys that it needs, depending on your platform. Some platforms such as Snowflake, it wouldn't do this because there aren't any indexes or constraints that would be applied there. Now that that's done, if I go back to WhereScape Red, this is the builder tool again. Remember, we didn't have any hubs, links, or sats built in here. But now that I have deployed that, refresh this so that the tree gets updated, I now have hubs, links, satellites. And you can see down here that I have the SQL demo project now. This includes all of the objects that I just deployed. And what I can do very quickly is take this, build a job, and I'll give it 10 threads here. And you can see that it's trying to run the things in parallel that it can based off of the data lineage that we provided. And now I can go and start this job. And while we wait for that scheduler to pick that up, we can see down here the scheduler is running and it has a 30-second sampler. So it's every 30 seconds checking the repository. And we leave a failed one here just to show you the logging here. This is against Redshift. We put in a invalid function call to tochar to show you the reporting that this can do for failed jobs. And we can see also the job running and those processes as it runs through this load. And it's actually already done. So I got to go back to the all jobs section and go to my completed job. You can see that it's run through and loaded all of this data and populated it all the way through into our raw vault. So at the end of this, what's really important is that quickly you can pull in an entire warehouse and build it out. Again, using standards, you have full control over the templates, how it builds the DDL, how it builds the DML, the scripts that get created, how it gets populated, as well as at the end, the creation of documentation. So let's take this real quick and we'll just document everything. And so it's going to build an HTML website that you can publish anywhere on your internet. And you have a few options here regarding CSS style sheets if you want to customize it for your own organization, as well as choosing some things as far as what you want included or not included in the various documentation. There's two sets of documentation that it creates by default: technical and user documentation. The user documentation is focused on the data analysts and report developers, and that really gives you the diagrams and the documentation that comes from either extraction or from you putting it into the documentation. If I display this in the browser here, and we look at user documentation, you get a full glossary, as well as your standards for naming, etc. But also if we go to our fact table, for instance, we have our comments, our documentation. It marks what things are measures and attributes, as well as our star schema, and then they can jump over to the various dimensions associated with that. Some of these things need to be filled out in the tool set for purpose, concept, and grain, things like that. But what's also great is if we are using this tool set, if you're in a highly secure environment where your QA engineers can't actually get into the data or the code, they can use the technical documentation, and you can see that this includes a lot of additional objects. And we can go to the fact table and go to that same fact table that we were just looking at in the user documentation, and we get a lot of additional information. The same star schema, we get our data lineage diagram, and as well as indices, any transformations and things like that. And if I jump over to dim customers, again, looking at that, we can see what things are the business key, slowly changing fields that are being tracked, etc. As well as we can look at the actual code in the documentation. So this is really great that this is all exposed out there. One of the things I really like to convey to people is that in the data warehouse space, we do a lot of work to get the data cleansed and prepared and ready for consumption. And a lot of times that effort is not properly transparent to your executives. And what this documentation, the automation toolset does for you is bubble up all that work that you've done and make it available to your executives, to your management team to see all that you've done. And this is all done for you while you simply build your objects and build your warehouse. And that's really important to really expose all this work that goes into this process and to make it transparent so that others can look at it and feel comfortable in what you've provided. So that covers the bulk of the demo. So what we'd like to do at this point is go back through and finish up a couple slides here and just kind of reiterate what we've covered. So I've gone through the design, whether that's from modeling or more kind of a data-driven approach where we pull in the information directly, developed it. In the case, we also deployed it. We fully documented it, which again is being done by the tool for you. And then you saw a little bit of operation there where we actually ran the jobs and loaded the actual data. So again, fast tracking your projects, you're able to focus on the 20% of the job, which is the actual data, making sure the data is correct, properly tested and modeled. Whereas the 80%, the bulk of the work is being done by the tool. All that mundane coding that you know how to do, but it's just part of the job, is taken care of by the tool set. It really lowers the risk involved. Your junior developers up to your senior developers are building the same code. You're just worried about the actual data, the actual business deliverable, and the true value that you're providing to the business. So I like to end with, without data, you're just another person with an opinion. So this tool set really enforces your organization having that data and actually being able to have conversations around real facts and information from your business. And I have real world experiences with this. I like to throw this, you can read this as I'm talking here. And as you bring up, think of some questions that you may have for us. The question about how long will your project take if I add 2 people, I've actually been given 12 people to a project. And after they handed me 12 additional data engineers, they asked me, okay, how long is the project going to take? And I came back and said, same time I told you already, because of the amount of time it takes to onboard people, manage them, keep everybody coordinated. Again, this tool set is going to make those people that are already productive members of your team 5 times more productive or more. So with that, Christine, do we have any questions out there?
We do, and just a reminder to everyone on this webcast that you can submit questions that you have in the Q&A box. We did have one come through that we have time for right now, and that is, how is the product licensed?
Okay, great question. So the product is licensed based off of the number of people that we make more productive. So it is per developer seat. There is no licensing for number of environments. You can have your dev, dev2, dev integrations, QA, UAT, production. You can have as many environments as you want. There's no additional licensing for that. It's simply licensed by developer seat. Now, when you license that, you do choose your target platform. Sorry, go ahead, Christine.
No, we did have one more come through as well. What types of organizations benefit the most from WhereScape software?
Oh, good question as well. And truth be told, all of them. Again, we have large organizations all the way down to small organizations. We have 1-person teams. We have healthcare, finance, credit unions, banks, insurance, all across the board of various types of organizations that use the tool set. When I was a customer, I had myself and 1 other engineer plus a QA engineer. So a fairly small team, and we were very productive. In fact, we were more productive than before I had the software, when I had a 12-person team building out a larger warehouse. So again, we have organizations with hundreds of developers as well.
Great, thanks, Kevin. Those were all the questions that we've had come through. But if anyone has any additional questions, feel free to reach out to us here at WhereScape or reach out to Kevin. And then, Kevin, any last thoughts?
No, I appreciate everybody attending. And again, I just can say from experience that once you use the tool set, you will not want to go back to doing it by hand. So thank you, everybody, for attending. And again, we're all available. Feel free to reach out, and we're happy to answer questions.